Number 10. John Torrington Ice Mummy. Back in 1845, two ships set sail from England in search of the Northwest Passage. The ships carried 134 crewmen between them. However, they got stuck and none of the men ever returned home. This disaster is known today as the Lost Franklin Expedition, and it's one of the most tragic and epic Arctic shipwrecks in history. Nobody survived, there was a lot of cannibalism going on, and the final days of these brave sailors must have been absolutely terrifying. The remains of those who died on the Franklin expedition were discovered in the 1980s. Well, not all of the bodies, but definitely a few. One of the bodies found belonged to John Torrington, an ice mummy with his face still frozen in his final minutes of terror when archaeologists freed him from his icy tomb on Baffin Island. It was thanks to John Torrington and the other ice mummies from the ships that the experts were able to piece together what exactly happened to these guys. They had suffered from lead poisoning, many of them had starved to death, and yes, the cannibalism was confirmed by knife marks on several human bones. But what's really interesting is that even though the ice mummies were found in the 80s, the actual ships that got stuck in the ice, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, were not discovered until 2014 and 2016, with a Canadian archaeology team exploring the interior of the HMS Terror for the first time only in 2019. If you're wondering why the bodies weren't found in the wreckage, it's because they had tried to escape and get to safety. But of course, they were literally in the worst place to try and do that, and they died in the attempt. Number 9. Microscopic organism. Scientists have thawed a living microscopic organism out of the Russian permafrost. This tiny organism survived for about 24,000 years solidified under the ice, and it may hold the secret to cryogenically freezing human tissue one day in the future. Scientists already knew that organisms could live for a couple hundred years. What nobody thought was that an organism could live frozen for over 20,000. According to Stas Malavin from the Institute of Psychochemical and Biological Problems, this is the most definitive proof as of yet that multicellular animals could potentially withstand extended periods of time in cryptobiosis, which is a fancy word for being frozen. But just what kind of organism was this? It's known as a rotifer, or a type of tiny plankton found in freshwater and saltwater. The researchers found the small planktonic organism by using a rotating drill and taking samples from 11 feet, 3.3 meters underground, at the bottom of the Alizea River, where the permafrost maintains a consistently cold temperature of approximately 14 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. Researchers found several dozen of the organisms, and once thawed, they quickly fed on bacteria and reproduced colonies of clones. This is one of the only living things ever found to be capable of surviving frozen for a long time. There's a type of Antarctic moss that can be regrown after spending 400 years trapped in ice, and there are nematodes that can be revived after spending 30,000 years trapped in sediments, though nematodes are single-celled and pretty simple. Number 8. Prehistoric Arrows. Archaeologists have unearthed roughly 70 arrow shafts, plus some textiles, shoes, reindeer bones, and much more on the side of a mountain in Norway, about 240 miles, 386 kilometers from the capital city of Oslo. Based on carbon dating, we know that the oldest of these arrows came from the year 4100 BC. That's about 6,000 years ago. The most recent arrow dates back to 1300 AD, only about 700 years ago. What's truly amazing if you think about it is that for about 5,000 years, the people living in Norway used the same kind of weapon, simple arrows and a simple bow, and they even hunted reindeer in the same place. Then, all of a sudden, everything changed. The reindeer vanished and arrows were replaced with nuclear weapons. Because the arrows were discovered in a melting ice patch, researchers are a little confused. Normally when a patch of ice melts, everything underneath it comes from around the same time. But the artifacts revealed by the melting ice here ranged throughout a period of about 5,000 years. Older artifacts are supposed to be at the bottom of a chunk of ice, with newer artifacts being at the top. But this wasn't the case here. The arrows were all mixed up and had to be dated in a lab. Some of the arrows still had their sharp heads attached, with researchers saying they were made from a variety of different materials including iron, mussel shell, and bone. Number 7. Swiss Artifacts. Global warming just keeps revealing artifacts that were once lost, like the amazing relics found in Sweden because of the melting glaciers. Because Switzerland is a country filled with mountains and ice, it's no surprise that some of the best things found come straight from Switzerland and the Swiss Alps. It's currently believed that by 2090 there won't be a single glacier left in Switzerland, meaning way more artifacts. One of the coolest artifacts uncovered recently was a moccasin from the Stone Age. Then there was a wooden statue believed to come from 100 BC, complete with a flat, featureless face and a creepy body with no arms. There was even a hiker who stumbled upon the lost possessions of a Neolithic hunter who lived 3,000 years ago. He discovered leg coverings, fragments of a bow, and an arrow case that would have been used to store arrows for hunting on the go. What else do you think the melting ice will reveal in Switzerland? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons too. Number 6. Too much mercury. Just this year, researchers found the melting ice in Greenland to contain a ridiculously high level of mercury. It's raised concerns over where exactly this volatile element comes from. The researchers published their findings in the journal Nature Geoscience, claiming that the Greenland ice sheet could be a source of pure mercury. And if you're wondering why this is so alarming, it's because mercury is one of the most powerful neurotoxins known to man. We've all heard of mercury poisoning at one time or another, and it's no joke. Samples of meltwater taken from the ice sheet in 2018 have shown that mercury levels in Greenland are actually comparable to some of the more populated places on Earth. Here's what makes mercury so alarming. It persists almost everywhere and cycles between the atmosphere and the environment. But mercury bioaccumulation is a huge issue inside of ecosystems. Mercury comes from volcanoes, coal plants, mines, things that are already terrible for the environment. When small organisms like plankton accidentally consume mercury, they pass it on to larger organisms who have also already consumed mercury. What this means is that when the big fish eats the medium fish, after the medium fish eats the small fish, the big fish consumes the largest volume of mercury and suffers the most devastating effects. For example, freshwater bass and swordfish are known for accumulating up to 1 million times more mercury than what's found in the water around them. The big deal with what's happening in Greenland with mercury being found inside the ice is that as the ice melts, it'll release huge deposits of mercury into the world's oceans. And that, my friends, is bad news. Number 5. The biggest iceberg. In Antarctica, the biggest piece of ice ever recently broke apart from the continent and drifted away as an iceberg. It's known as Iceberg A76, and according to NASA, it's the largest iceberg currently floating anywhere on our planet. It's a type of tabular iceberg, named as such because from the air it looks a lot like a table. But it's a very large table. The iceberg is roughly 105 miles, 169 kilometers long, and 15 miles, 24 kilometers wide. It's bigger than Rhode Island and is bobbing around in the ocean, slowly melting. Even though the iceberg is melting, it won't make the sea level rise. This is because it's already displacing a huge amount of water. It's like an ice cube in your drink. Even as the ice cube melts, your drink doesn't overflow. Laura Garish from the British Antarctic Survey even said that the iceberg is just part of the natural cycle and probably wasn't even caused by climate change. However, this doesn't mean we don't need to be afraid of Antarctica getting warmer. There's still enough ice on the continent to raise the global sea level by 200 feet, 61 meters. Number 4. Cave bear. The immaculate remains of a cave bear from the Ice Age have been found in Russia, and they are amazing. The cave bear is the only one of its kind to ever be discovered with soft tissue. These creatures are normally found as nothing more than fossilized skeletons. The discovery of the bear was made by a couple of reindeer herders in the far north of Siberia in the Lyakovsky Islands. Scientists from the Northeastern Federal University in Yakutsk even said that the bear still had its nose intact, which is something unheard of in a species that has been extinct for 15,000 years. But what exactly is a cave bear? This animal lived around the same time as the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino, and the saber-toothed tiger, and it was a monster of an animal, like a normal bear but much bigger and much stronger. But just like all of these other prehistoric animals, they went extinct at the end of the last ice age. This particular bear got trapped in the ice sometime between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago when it died. And even though researchers haven't actually been able to visit the site because it's so far and remote, they're hoping that there could be even more incredible animal remains frozen under the permafrost, just waiting to be discovered. By finding more animals in such great states of preservation, scientists are that much closer to potentially bringing them back to life. Number 3. Frozen Viking Box. Glacial ice melting along the side of a mountain passage has revealed a plethora of ancient Viking artifacts. One of the artifacts has been a bit more intriguing than the others. Researchers found a wooden box with its lid still firmly shut. It once belonged to a Viking of unknown origin living in ancient Norway. Archaeologists opened the lid to reveal what was hidden inside. When the researchers opened the box, they were shocked to discover that it did not contain gold, treasure, jewelry, or anything else that we might see as valuable. Instead, the old Viking box was carrying pieces of beeswax. In other words, the box contained nothing but boring old candles. Kinda disappointing. Researchers with the Glacier Archaeology program dated the box back to between the years 1475 and 1635. This means it's not even that old, and it may not have even belonged to an actual Viking if the box is only 386 years old at the low end of the spectrum. The Vikings had already been gone for 400 years. Instead of being some brave Viking warrior's candles, the beeswax in the box was most likely produced by a farmer in the summer and then transported across the icy path, where it became lost and frozen until archaeologists dug it up. Number 2. Mysterious ice ship. There's been a ship discovered in the ice of Antarctica, but this is not your typical shipwreck. From what we can understand, the ship is about 400 feet, 122 meters long, and trapped underneath the ice and snow. The massive structure was detected using Google Earth. The boat looks oddly like a cruise liner with chimneys sprouting out from its middle and cabin windows all along the sides of it. Unfortunately, no one actually knows what the object found on Google Earth is. It could absolutely be a monster of a boat, somehow tipped on its side and covered in snow. But if that's the case, how did it vanish without anyone realizing it? If a cruise liner had gone missing in Antarctica, everyone would know about it, right? Someone would have seen something. Some people have suggested the mysterious ship could be a leftover technology from a Nazi base. Others say it could have something to do with extraterrestrials. We just don't know, and it's not like anyone can pop down quickly and take a look for themselves. Number 1. Ice 19. In 2021, scientists identified the 19th form of water ice. According to Live Science, the ice is incredibly rare. It's composed of exotic crystals that form at very low temperatures and very high pressures. Researchers say Ice 19, as it's being called, only exists in laboratory experiments. But they also say it could help humans to understand more about what's going on deep inside of the Earth's mantle and on other planets and moons in the solar system that are significantly colder than Earth. Naming a new type of ice is not a simple process. It must have a completely unique crystal structure. Scientists also need to identify the simplest repeating structure of the ice, where all of the atoms are inside of that structure, and what the symmetry of the structure is. Ice is actually really complicated. For example, Ice 1 has 6-sided crystals and is commonly found all over Earth. This is why snowflakes are shown with 6 sides. Ice 19 only has 4 sides. It can also only be created in a setting of -247 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not a normal temperature to be found on our planet, but it is a fairly average temperature in space. By understanding Ice 19 and how it functions, scientists could figure out how celestial bodies such as Uranus and Neptune are put together. Number 10. East Side Access Tunnels. East Side Access is one of the largest infrastructure projects ever undertaken by New York City's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, MTA. It aims to expand Long Island Railroad (LIRR) service to Grand Central Terminal, which will reduce many riders' average commute time by up to 40 minutes. To make this possible, over 8 miles of tunnels are being built beneath the streets of Manhattan and Queens. The project began during the 1990s, and when it's finally complete, there will be a new 8-track terminal with 4 waiting platforms below Grand Central, serving an estimated 162,000 customers daily. The $11.1 billion endeavor is projected to open to the public in December of next year if all the deadlines are met in a timely fashion. This image, taken in February 2013, shows one of the massive caverns beneath Grand Central that will eventually take on the appearance of an ordinary train station, with 2 levels of tracks that will accommodate up to 24 LIRR trains per hour. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced in May of this year that most of the major construction has been completed, and that the electrified third rail on the tracks is slated to be powered up next month. Number 9. Chuchi Tunnels. During the Vietnam War, the Communist Viet Cong (VC) had to compete with the American and South Vietnamese troops, who were much better supplied. To gain an edge, the VC dug tens of thousands of miles of narrow tunnels in and around the Chuchi district northwest of Saigon and elsewhere. These labyrinths were used for housing troops, transporting supplies and communications, situating booby traps, launching surprise attacks, and slipping below ground to safety. The network grew to include bomb shelters, kitchens, hospitals, and even theaters for entertaining soldiers. By going underground, the VC and North Vietnamese troops had a major advantage against American forces, who relied heavily on aerial bombing. Many of the tunnels were dug painstakingly by hand, little by little, expanding on a previous network that was built in the 1940s during the War for Vietnamese independence from French colonial authority. Upon their completion, these subterranean pathways spanned a 155-mile, 250-kilometer stretch from outside Saigon to the Cambodian border, according to History.com. American and South Vietnamese soldiers, known as tunnel rats, were trained to enter these spaces and detect booby traps and enemy troops. Many soldiers from all fighting factions died in the Chuchi tunnels, which are now a popular tourist attraction as part of a Vietnam War memorial park in Ho Chi Minh City. Number 8. Church of Bones. From the outside looking in, the Santa Maria della Concezione dei Cappuccini, or Our Lady of the Conception of the Cappuccinis, looks pretty ordinary. But beneath the chapel, there's a series of crypts with the bones of over 4,000 friars covering the walls and ceilings. Some of the bones are arranged into patterns that are said to have religious significance, while others are dressed in Franciscan attire. Commissioned in 1626 by Pope Urban VIII, the church was completed in 1631. That same year, a member of the Capuchin order named Cardinal Antonio Barberini ordered for the remains of thousands of friars to be exhumed from their original resting places and relocated in the church's crypt. The remains date between 1500 and 1870. There are 5 chapels in the crypt, all which rely exclusively on a very limited supply of natural light and add to the site's eeriness. Several noteworthy historical figures have visited, including the Marquis de Sade and Mark Twain. It's also said that the crypt inspired other famous sites throughout the world, including the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic and the Skull Chapel in Poland. Number 7. Aktun Tunicil Muknal. Located in the Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve in western Belize, Aktun Tunicil Muknal, also known as ATM or the Cave of the Crystal Sepulchre, is a Maya archaeological site showcasing stoneware, ceramics, and human skeletons. Just to get there is a journey requiring an hour-long hike, including through shallow rivers. Entry into the cave itself involves crossing a river and traversing through several narrow passages. The site's most well-known human remains are known as the Crystal Maiden. Despite the feminine name, the bones belong to an adolescent boy who was perhaps 17 years old when he died, possibly as a sacrifice victim. His bones appear to be sparkling due to calcification, hence his nickname. Many of the cave's artifacts are calcified to the floor, showing just how long they've been sitting there untouched. An object called the monkey pot is one of just 4 known vessels of its type ever found in Central America. Additionally, the Maya reshaped the cave to fit their cultural and spiritual beliefs, including by constructing sacrificial altars. Numerous wild animals live within the cave system, including a large bat population, freshwater crabs, crayfish, catfish, other tropical fish, predatory spiders, otters, and possibly a rodent species known as the agouti. Number 6. Cincinnati Subway. Beneath the streets of Cincinnati, Ohio lie 3 miles of abandoned subway tunnels and 4 stations that were never used. The Cincinnati Subway project began in the early 20th century amid rapidly increasing downtown congestion. It was one of the earliest attempts to establish a subway system in the U.S. But the project's costs kept rising. Political uncertainty made the funding unreliable to begin with. The Cincinnati Subway was canceled indefinitely in 1928 with the Great Depression right around the corner, when it was 1/3 complete. The closure was meant to be temporary, but the project was never revived and was officially canceled in 1948. Its eerie remnants remain as a testament to what Andrew J. Hawkins described in The Verge as one of the biggest transportation blunders of all time. The unused, unfinished system is the nation's largest abandoned subway. Designated unsafe for public entry, the empty tunnels are kept closed, making it nearly impossible to visit. City officials have gone out of their way to demolish entrances and otherwise conceal any signs of its existence, save for a few remaining sidewalk grates. Anyone who wants to access the tunnels must know where to go and be willing to trespass. Author and photographer Jake Mecklenburg is one of few people who have seen the Cincinnati Subway for themselves, and he documented the creepy sight for the rest of us to enjoy through his photos, in hopes of keeping its history alive. The city currently has no plans to repurpose the empty space, and it seems like authorities would much prefer to forget that the failed transit system is even there. Have you ever been here before? Would you like to visit? Let me know in the comments down below. Seems like a fun, creepy place to explore. And if you're new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button for more videos like these. Number 5. The Catacombs of Kom ElShokava. Located in Alexandria, Egypt, the Catacombs of Kom ElShokava, Mound of Shards, is an acropolis containing Alexandrian tombs and statues, as well as archaeological artifacts and architecture featuring a combination of elements from Roman, Greek, and Egyptian style. Built in the 2nd century during the age of the Antonine emperors, the tombs were tunneled into bedrock and equipped with a circular staircase that was used for carrying the deceased to their final resting place until sometime during the 4th century. Visitors to the tombs brought vessels containing food and wine, which they consumed during the time they spent there. Not wanting to bring the containers home, they then smashed them onto the ground, hence the site's name, which translates to Mound of Shards. The site was rediscovered in 1900 when a donkey fell through the ground and into a burial shaft, and was named after the heaps of clay shards found inside. Since then, 3 sarcophagi and an array of human and animal remains have been found there. Experts are perplexed because it appears as though the catacombs were intended for a single wealthy family, yet it was expanded at one point for reasons that are unclear. Number 4. Moose Jaw Tunnels. For decades, officials in the sleepy Canadian city of Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan denied that there was an underground network of tunnels right below the population's feet. But when part of Main Street collapsed during the 1970s, it became increasingly difficult to deny their existence. Excavations eventually proved that the secret labyrinths actually do exist, and that the senior citizens who claimed to remember them were speaking the truth. Chinese railway workers built the tunnels starting in 1908 after being beaten and discriminated against for allegedly stealing white people's jobs. On top of that, a head tax was imposed on Chinese immigrants who lacked legal status. Those who were unable to pay it hid underground, hoping the prejudice would eventually pass. Accessed through the basements of buildings owned by legal Chinese immigrants, the tunnels were used for many years, with some people even raising families in them, according to the Globe and the Mail. During the 1920s, when the US and much of Canada implemented prohibition policies, the tunnels were repurposed as a bootlegging hub, and Moose Jaw regularly received visitors from the Chicago mob. The Chinese immigrants, aka the tunnel's original inhabitants, and the local police reportedly cooperated with the gangsters, while the mayor took a hands-off approach to the situation entirely. The tunnels housed a seedy underworld of prostitution, boozing, gambling, and other vices. Even Al Capone was rumored to have spent time there, and it's said that he even moved briefly to Moose Jaw to evade federal US agents who were on his heels. Today, the network is a tourist attraction that offers historical reenactments and guided tours through the dark tunnels and their amenities. Number 3. Kish. Known for its luxurious beaches and shopping malls, the Iranian island of Kish in the Persian Gulf is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the Middle East. It's not primarily known for its history or ancient architecture, but many visitors don't think to venture underground in search of such sites. Kish, or the Kish Qanat, is a pre-Islamic hydraulic system consisting of a series of wells that were built on a gentle incline to guide water from the nearby mountains to dry areas. Built over 2,500 years ago, this Persian architectural gem predates the development of Roman aqueducts. Altogether, there are 274 wells which passed water through 3 layers of materials that filtered out solid objects and neutralized acids in the water. The water at the bottom was considered the best for drinking, while the water collected from the upper layers was used for irrigating fields. There's a series of tunnels that stretch for 5 miles, 8 kilometers, and resemble a subterranean city situated 52 feet, 16 meters below ground near the wells. The Qanat and tunnels are unique because they were carved out of coral, which almost entirely makes up the island of Kish, offering visitors a unique glimpse at fossils, shells, and corals that are millions of years old. In 1999, the site was expanded with plans to turn it into an underground shopping center containing restaurants, a museum, and gift shops. While the project was never completed, it is supposedly still in the works and would probably make the sprawling, deserted site seem a little less spooky. Number 2. Oyster Adams Bunker. Fallout shelters became popular during the Cold War under President John F. Kennedy, who warned Americans of impending nuclear war in 1961. Congress subsequently spent $169 million establishing public and private bunkers for people to seek shelter in if nuclear war became a reality. One such facility was implemented in the basement of Oyster Adams School in Washington, D.C. in 1962. It sits behind a plain-looking door that offers no clues as to what's on the other side. Entering the fallout shelter is like stepping back in time. Its original contents remain intact and went untouched for some 55 years after it was built, and is one of the few remaining fallout shelters, as most were dismantled during the 70s when the government decided they were no longer necessary. The space is long, narrow, dark, and was meant to house up to 100 survivors while they waded through the nuclear fallout of a nearby attack. It contained enough provisions for 2 weeks. Barrels of drinking water and boxes of supplies, including all-purpose survival biscuits, still line the walls as an eerie testament to the widespread fear of nuclear warfare that once pervaded the nation. There are also sanitation kits, aka portable toilets topped with rubber seats. The shelter's occupants would have had no privacy while doing their business. Additionally, the bunker contains medical supplies and pamphlets on how to handle emergencies. Like all the others that were built at the height of the American public's hysteria over impending nuclear doom, it was never used. Number 1. Down Street Ghost Station. The Down Street Ghost Station is just one of numerous abandoned underground metro stations throughout London. It opened in 1907 and was only used for 25 years because its long tunnels from station to platform were considered both inconvenient and a safety issue. Local residents tended to be wealthy, so they often traveled by other means, and there were also several nearby stations that commuters preferred over Down Street. Simply put, people didn't use the station enough to justify keeping it open, and many trains passed right through without stopping, leading to its closure in 1932. But it's the Down Street Station's long tunnels that made it useful as a bunker for the Railway Executive Committee, REC, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and the War Cabinet during World War II. Tasked with directing all the country's train activity, the REC housed as many as 40 employees in the bunker at any given time throughout the war, with workers staying below ground for up to 2 weeks at a time. The bunker was gutted after the war, but the station still contains evidence of its wartime use, including hand-painted signs pointing toward where the bunker's offices were, bright yellow paint that was supposedly implemented to brighten up an undeniably dreary place, and leftover kitchen and bathroom fixtures. Since then, the station has only been used for engineering purposes and as an emergency exit from the underground. There are occasional tours through the site, which involve going into some pretty filthy tunnels and areas that are pitch dark.
10. The SS Valencia. Something strange happened off the coast of Vancouver Island, Canada. The year was 1906 when the SS Valencia crashed into the rocky shoreline of the island. The horrible accident was considered one of the worst maritime disasters in this particular area, which is saying something since it's known locally as the Graveyard of the Pacific. Chunks of its wreckage can still be seen there today. What was the SS Valencia? It was a coastal passenger liner. Before it sank, it was on its way to Seattle with 108 passengers and 65 crew members. The ship itself was 252 feet of iron technology built many years earlier in 1882. On the night of the accident, the Valencia struck a reef during a very violent storm. The stormy weather had made it impossible to properly navigate, and hitting the reef caused a huge break in the hull. Within just a handful of minutes, the ship was taking on water. To avoid the ship sinking and everyone dying, the captain ordered the ship be breached, but it couldn't happen. The ship simply couldn't get to shore. There were too many rocks. The passengers began to panic, and lifeboats were launched in a desperate attempt to get away from the ruined vessel. 3 of the lifeboats immediately flipped over, and the last one was taken by the wind, and it vanished with the waves. The following panic was probably similar to the final hours of the Titanic, with people hauling themselves off the side of the boat and screaming in terror. By the end of the night, 136 people had died, including every single woman and child on board. What's really horrifying is that long after the tragedy of the Valencia, people have seen its ghost. There have been sightings off the coast of Vancouver Island of a huge phantom ship that looks just like the Valencia, as well as lifeboats being rowed by skeletons in the mist. Number 9. The train that vanished. There's a rather bizarre legend of a ghost train that seems to be lost in an endless time loop. This may sound crazy, but just hear me out. The train, called Zanetti, left Rome on June 14, 1911, carrying 106 passengers. After entering a tunnel, the train vanished. Only 2 people were ever found from the vanished train after they supposedly jumped off the moving vehicle when they realized something was terribly wrong. They said that once the train entered the tunnel, the passengers began to act erratic and strange, and that the train became covered in a milky white mist. These people were hospitalized with psychiatric disorders for the rest of their lives. After the vanishings, the tunnel was searched extensively. No one could find where the train went or any trace of the passengers. To this day, nobody knows how it could have literally vanished into thin air. One of the prevailing theories is that the train became stuck in a time loop. It has apparently been witnessed by people in Russia, India, and even Germany. There was an incident in 1845 in which 104 Italians appeared in Mexico, claiming they were from Rome. The Mexicans thought they were insane and locked them up, and they all died. In Russia, people have witnessed a ghost train driving on phantom rails. Nobody knows if all these incidents are really related, and during World War II, the original tunnel where the train vanished from was destroyed during an air attack. 8. The Octavius. In 1761, the Octavius docked in London, took on cargo destined for China, and set sail with a full crew. They later arrived in China, unloaded their cargo, and headed back out to sea with their stores filled with cargo to take home to Britain. But after Octavius left China, it went missing and was declared lost. About 15 years later, in 1775, a whaling ship working off the coast of Greenland spotted a rather ragged-looking vessel with torn sails. It had clearly been at sea for a long time, as it was worn and beaten by the weather. When the whalers boarded the mysterious ship, they found it deserted. At least, they thought it was deserted. They went below deck and found all 28 men from the crew frozen to death in their quarters. Even more shocking is that when they went to the captain's cabin, they found him sitting at his desk in the middle of writing in the ship's logbook, also frozen as if stuck by spontaneous paralysis. Also in the captain's cabin was his wife and young son, both frozen to death. It turned out that the captain of the Octavius had tried to navigate through the Northwest Passage to get back to England instead of sailing around the entire world. The last place marked in the ship's ledger was a desolate piece of Arctic Ocean about 50 miles north of Alaska. The crew must have become frozen when the ship got stuck in the ice. Then when the ice thawed, it managed to float on its own all the way to Greenland. Do you think something like that could happen today? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 7. The Lady Loveabond. In the 1700s, it was bad luck to have a woman on a ship when it was sailing across the ocean. In February of 1748, the Lady Loveabond left England on its way to Portugal. Simon Reed, the captain, had just gotten married and, despite warnings for his crew, brought his wife along for the journey with him. Unfortunately for everyone on board, one of the crew members was jealous. It was first mate John Rivers, in love with the captain's bride. Once they were out at sea sailing through the English Channel, John Rivers attacked the captain and commandeered the ship. He intentionally steered it into a 9-mile stretch of treacherous terrain known as the Goodwin Sands, basically a shallow island that has caused the destruction of hundreds of vessels. John Rivers effectively broke apart the ship by directing it into the sands and killed every last person on board. 50 years after the devastation, the captain of the Edenbridge recorded in his ship's log that he almost collided with a schooner while passing along the English Channel. 50 years after that, yet another ship witnessed the same schooner heading towards the Goodwin Sands. The pattern repeats itself every 50 years, but unsurprisingly, these stories have gotten a bit more flamboyant as the years go on. A captain in 1948 claimed he saw the ghost of the Lady Loveabond, but that the ship was surrounded by a creepy green aura. The huge disappointment came in modern times in 1998, when curious locals went out to wait for the legendary ship to appear, but it never did. Maybe it only comes when nobody's looking for it. 6. The Ghost Blimp. On a Sunday afternoon in 1942, a casual beachgoer observed a blimp slowly approaching the beach at a rather low elevation. It was a dirigible about 147 feet long that touched the surface of the beach, bounced a bit into the air, and then smashed into a hill and kept on going. It was a ghost blimp, and it continued to drift inland, passing golfers, freaking people out by flying over their houses, and eventually losing elevation in San Francisco, at which point it scraped across rooftops, hit a telephone pole, and crashed in front of a house on Bellevue Avenue. The San Francisco Chronicle reported at the time that a crowd of about 2,000 arrived to see what was going on with the weird blimp. It had gotten wrapped around a 1928 Dodge sedan, nearly taking out its owner. But where did the strange blimp come from? The military said it took off from Treasure Island at 6 o'clock in the morning as part of a coastal anti-submarine patrol. However, after the blimp took off, it started floating aimlessly until it made its weird journey into the San Francisco area. Nobody ever found the crew. There was no way they could have jumped off the ship unless they wanted to drown, and there was no reason for them to flee. They simply vanished and were never found. 5. Bermuda Triangle Flight 19. On December 5, 1945, 5 torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Collectively, the planes were known as Flight 19. They were scheduled to partake in a training exercise that involved them flying through the Bermuda Triangle. Each aircraft was piloted by a crew of 3, each of which had over 300 hours of experience in the air, for reasons that are still unclear to this day. All 5 bombers vanished without a trace and were never seen again. It started with the pilots getting lost. They became disoriented, and one of the pilots radioed that they didn't know where they were. One claimed that both compasses weren't working and they didn't know which way to fly. The transmissions from Flight 19 became faint and eventually turned to static. The Navy scrambled search planes. A pair of flying boats took off from Fort Lauderdale, and 20 minutes later, one of them vanished from radar. It wasn't until the next day that the Navy could dispatch a rescue team of over 300 boats to look for Flight 19 and the vanished Mariner flying boat. Despite massive search efforts, not a single piece of debris or a body was ever found. There ended up being no clear explanation for why all 5 aircrafts became so disoriented, or why the plane that went searching for them vanished too. There have been a lot of theories since then, including one that says aliens came down and abducted all 6 planes. 4. Reappearing ghost ship. A ship vanished in 2009 in the Pacific Ocean and reappeared mysteriously 9 years later. It's been called the most modern ghost ship of our age. The container vessel was seen off the coast of Taiwan before it vanished until it was seen again in 2018 south of Myanmar. Local fishermen boarded the vessel but found nobody on board. The ship was empty. Nobody actually had any clue where the ship had even come from. It didn't even have any cargo. The official reports from Myanmar said that the ship was in perfect working condition and that it must have been abandoned, though nobody could speculate as to why. A quick cover story was made saying the ship had been on its way to Bangladesh towed by a tugboat, and then bad weather snapped the cables. But some say this was just a quick excuse to put the story of a mysterious ghost ship to bed. What do you think? 3. A3 ghost crash. In England, somebody witnessed a ghost car crash. It happened on December 11, 2002. Drivers going down the A3 phoned the authorities to report an accident that they'd witnessed in which a car swerved off the road with its headlights flaring in the night and drove straight into the underbrush on the side of the highway. There was no reason to believe the claims were fake. However, by the time the police arrived on scene, there was no car crash. There was nothing there, not even tire tracks. This was a little dismaying for the people who had phoned the police in the first place because they swore that they saw a car crash. What happened next defies all logic. Police continued to search the area, and that was when they found a maroon car lodged deep in the bushes, not far from where the original crash was reported. The windshield was smashed, the doors were bent and broken, and in the driver's seat was a skeleton. It was immediately obvious that the car crash had not happened that day, but several months before. In fact, after a bit of investigating, the police discovered that the driver had actually been missing for 5 months. Christopher Chandler was last seen leaving West London and was reported missing when he never arrived home. For those 5 months since his vanishing, he had been turning into a skeleton off the side of the highway where nobody could see his car. So what did the people witness on the A3 that night? Was it their imagination that led police to Christopher's body, or a ghostly replay of his deadly crash? 2. Missing boat in the Bermuda Triangle. In December of 2020, the Bermuda Triangle claimed yet another victim. An unnamed vessel with at least 20 people aboard went missing after sailing into the deadly area. The group left Bimini and were on their way to Lake Worth, according to the Coast Guard. They should have arrived later in the day, but they never did. Somewhere between the Bahamas and South Florida, inside the evil Bermuda Triangle, they vanished into thin air. A search was launched, but no evidence was found. Expert rescue crews looked for 84 hours across more than 17,000 square miles and found no hint of them. The waters were relatively calm. There was no reason why a 30-foot luxury vessel would tip over and sink. It just poofed into thin air and was gone, along with every last person on board. 1. Pan Am Flight 914. There's a story that says Pan Am Flight 914 took off from New York City on July 2, 1955. The flight was carrying 57 passengers and 6 crew members. The flight should only have lasted a couple of hours before arriving in Miami. However, it didn't land until March 9, 1985. The plane had somehow gotten lost for 30 or so years. Some say it was teleported away by a UFO and then brought back to the same place they originally stole it from nearly 40 years later. Other theories say the plane went through a wormhole and was only gone for a handful of seconds, though years passed by on Earth. However, this story is a complete fabrication. It's an urban legend with absolutely no basis in reality. The story was published in 1985 by a tabloid magazine, the original clickbait gurus. The paper ran the story twice, each time changing the arrival of the plane to the years that they ran the story. It's an exciting thing to imagine, but unfortunately, it never actually happened. Thanks for watching! Do you believe in ghost ships? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for more wild videos. See you next time, bye!